Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I am your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. It is a double header of MMA Lockcasts this week, as we obviously broke down UFC Shanghai earlier in the week. And now we turn our attention to PFL World Tournament 10. It is the final PFL World Tournament event of the season. They obviously have their Champions Series going on. I believe their next event after this will be in October. PFL Europe still going on. PFL MENA still going on. PFL Africa, if I'm not mistaken, probably still going on. So a ton of things to look forward to for the PFL. But in terms of their world title or their world tournament, this is the final event. We'll have 3 title fights all on the main card, capped off with the middleweight title on the line between Fabian Edwards taking on Dalton Rosta. Then in the co-main event, we have heavyweights going at it with Alexander Romanov looking to go ahead against Oleg Popov. And then the light heavyweight title is also on the line, or the light heavyweight world title, whatever they're freaking calling it, between Sullivan, Cauley, and Antonio Carlos Jr. So those 3 fights will be on the main card. The rest of those fights will be on the prelims. I believe there's 10 total fights, some recognizable names, some newcomers. Should be interesting to break down for you guys, as I've already placed 5 bets for this card. I'll obviously be finalizing it on the afternoon of the fights, which is actually going to be tomorrow, aka Thursday. So don't get caught slacking there. Weird timing for their final World Tournament event, but you know, are you really surprised with the PFL and their timing and dates with some of these events? It is what it is. Reminder, UFC Shanghai content is all on the YouTube page as well. I've obviously got a bunch of plays and stuff on the Lock of the Night Patreon page for that. We also have LFA going down. I'll have breakdowns for that for you guys on Thursday, so stay tuned for that. Road to UFC is Friday morning, but I won't have any video breakdowns for that. Strictly written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. So if you want access to that, make sure you guys check the link in the description below. All right. Without further ado, let's get right into this 10-fight PFL card, which kicks off in a matchup between JP St. Louis, who comes in at minus 135, going up against Tyler Ray, who comes in at plus 115. Now, both these guys are making their PFL debuts, while St. Louis is also looking to come back from a 1.5-year-long layoff. He's currently riding a 4-fight winning streak, which included winning a regional title last time around, where he was able to sink in a guillotine choke against his opponent in the second round of their matchup and force the tap. He's also been able to hand Nick Meck, who is a recent PFL competitor, the first pro loss of his career back in, I believe, September of 2023 or near the ending of 2023, where he was able to defeat him on the scorecards by majority decision. It seems like St. Louis does kind of struggle with guys that look to take him to the ground and have a good enough gas tank to be able to do it for 15 minutes, because his gas tank is not all that bad. He has mediocre striking, mediocre grappling. I believe he's a BJJ blue belt or purple belt, if I'm not mistaken. You know, athletically gifted, strong, explosive, but, you know, competition a little bit sketchy. His layoff obviously a little bit sketchy as well. Trains under the Fusion XL team, which obviously known for guys like Phil Rowe, formerly Rodolfo Vieira was with that training camp as well. Lyoto Machida spent a camp or 2 there as well, down there I believe in Orlando. He's going up against Tyler Ray, who trains out of Killcliff FC. Very solid fighter. He started his career 10-2, and then he went on a 3-fight losing streak when he decided to move up to 185 pounds. I don't really understand that. Maybe the cut to 170 pounds was a little bit too difficult for him. He ended up losing, like I said, those 3 fights at middleweight, the last of which was against eventual UFC signee Eric McConico. He did bounce back in the light heavyweight division later on in 2024 over a very low-level opponent, but I think that was more so just to stay active. And now this matchup against St. Louis is down at 175 pounds, which is where he found the majority, or at least closer to where he found the majority of his success. He is a BJJ brown belt, which is why you often see him looking to take fights to the ground. And obviously that got harder for him at 185 pounds. I think with him coming back down closer to that 170 pound range, he'll be fighting guys closer to his size and guys that he should be able to out-grapple. And I think he has a good opponent here against JP St. Louis to do that against. He has, I think, better grappling, obviously BJJ brown belt, decent striking, good enough wrestling that I think he can really put it on St. Louis here and grind this fight out. So I'll kick this card off with an underdog here with Tyler Ray. Mediocre confidence. I think this is a spot that he should be able to get the better of St. Louis, especially take advantage of the layoff that St. Louis is coming off of. So give me Ray and Ray by decision to kick off the card. All right, next up, we got Josh Silveira coming in at plus 205, going up against Murad Ramazanov, who comes in at minus 240. Now, I really thought with Silveira going down to 185 pounds, he'd be more well-suited for this weight class. You obviously see him in way better shape, athletically speaking, or physically speaking, I should say, but it doesn't really seem like that the potential that I saw in him going down to middleweight really paid off. That first matchup that he had of the tournament going up against Mike Shipman, he won round 1 and 3, but the second round was very not a good look at all. He was getting held up against the cage, really didn't have many answers for the strong wrestling and clinching game of Mike Shipman. Luckily, he was able to turn the tide in that third round and snatch that momentum back to get the win. But then last time around against Fabian Edwards, a mediocre first round, but then pretty much got controlled and was on the defensive for rounds 2 and 3 because he couldn't deal with the striking and grappling of Edwards. So again, it does not seem like Silveira is going to flourish into that high-level MMA fighter that a lot of people expected him to be, especially considering he's been around mixed martial arts since he came out the womb. Right? His dad, obviously, Conan Silveira, one of the head coaches over there at American Top Team. Silveira also went to college to round out his wrestling game, but it's really not coming to fruition, and we're seeing it as he continues to fight these higher levels of fighters. If he can get to his wrestling, his striking leaves a lot to be desired, but he can also be out-grappled by a lot of opponents, as we've been seeing in recent fights. Now, speaking of not really living up to the potential, Murad Ramazanov came into the PFL last year with an 11-0 record, was able to pull off a solid victory over Laureano Staropoli in his first fight, but it's been all downhill since then. But we can't really blame him for his first 2 losses against Shamil Musayev, who has turned into one of the biggest stars in PFL and one of the more dangerous fighters as well. So he lost those 2 fights, and then last time around against Aaron Jeffrey, very close back and forth fight. You could have pretty much flipped a coin there. It went to a split decision, and unfortunately for Ramazanov, he was unable to get his hand raised. Again, a lot of clinching, a lot of back and forth, a lot of takedown attempts from both guys, but unfortunately it was Jeffrey who ended up getting his hand raised there. But Murad, at his best, is a guy that likes to rely on that smothering grappling approach, and usually he's very strong with establishing those dominant positions and grinding guys out until he can find finishes, or just going the full 15 minutes and winning fights on the scorecards. He was very dangerous in the ONE FC promotion, but it seems to be tapering off a little bit on the North American side of things. But I also think a lot of it had to do with the stylistic matchups he was going up against, and obviously the improved grappling defense of Shamil Musayev compared to what we had seen from him earlier on in his career. Now, here against Silveira, I'd be very surprised if outside of the first round, Silveira can be competitive with Ramazanov in the grappling realm. I think Ramazanov is the better wrestler. I think he's the better controller. I think he's better with smothering, better scrambler as well. Both guys have suspect gas tanks, so I don't think that's going to play a huge factor in this matchup. But I think it's going to be Ramazanov who just has that success pinning Silveira against the cage, dragging him to the ground, and hopefully he can sprinkle in some damage as well, because we obviously know with recent changes in the MMA scoring, damage and threatening to finish the fight is a little bit more leaned upon for scoring rather than just straight up control. So Ramazanov is going to have to get off on some damage here while keeping Silveira on the defensive, but I think he'll do so. I think he'll be very successful with it. I think he'll keep Silveira pinned in bad spots, especially in rounds 2 and round 3, and I think we see Ramazanov go on to win this fight by decision. All right, next up in the heavyweight division, we got Sergey Bilostenniyy coming in at -195, going up against Carl Williams, who comes in at +170. Now, starting off on the Bilostenniyy side of things, he's coming off a very controversial decision loss against Valentin Moldavsky last time around. I thought it was pretty obvious that Bilostenniyy won round one. He hurt Moldavsky near the ending of that round, stealing that round back in his favor. The third round I thought was clearly for Moldavsky as Bilostenniyy started to slow down and Moldavsky was able to dictate the pace. But it was in the second round where it started to seem that Bilostenniyy was starting to slow down, but there were often big enough shots from Moldavsky throwing with big shots, big combinations, and I think those moments is what played more so to the judges than some of the smaller work that Bilostenniyy was doing throughout that round. That was one of those weird cases where you see the AI scoring for round two was in Bilostinny's favor, while the verdict score was actually in Moldavsky's favor. So kind of split there in terms of the crowd. On social media, it seemed like there was a large uproar that Bilostenniyy got robbed, but I thought it was a close fight. It wasn't a robbery, could have gone either way. It really came down to that second round. Now, Bilostenniyy, very solid striker, throws in good combinations, has a nasty kick as well, loves the spinning stuff, loves the flashy stuff, but that obviously starts to dwindle as we get into deeper water. His takedown defense has tremendously improved from earlier on in his career, which forces opponents to try to strike with him rather than just easily get him to the ground and grinding him out from there. That will clearly be tested here against Carl Williams, who has been known to take opponents to the ground and smother them from that top position. Unfortunately, that's kind of what led to him getting released from the UFC, even while he just had his 7-fight winning streak snapped by Jonata Dinez. But that was a fight where he was kind of provoked into fighting a little bit more of an entertaining style, and he ended up getting outstruck by the superior striker. Got to his grappling in the final round, but it was too little too late by then. And then last time around, lost a split decision against Oleg Popov in a very close fight. Should the scoring that's now in effect have been in place when he fought Popov, Williams probably wins that fight. He stopped the majority of takedowns, especially after that first round, and he was landing damage while Popov was just controlling and holding Williams against the cage. So unfortunately, Williams came out on the short end of the stick in that decision, losing 2 straight fights, and now hoping to turn the tide with his this fight against Sergey Bilostenniyy. I rate Bilostenniy's striking obviously much better than Williams. Williams can pack some power in his punches, but he's not so often relying on that. He's more so relying on smothering opponents and taking them to the ground. And now that he doesn't have to worry about impressing the UFC brass, we might see him try to implement that here against Sergey Bilostenniyy. But I think we'll see Bilostenniyy stop those initial takedowns, land the more effective damage, especially through the first 2 rounds. And then once this fight gets into the third round, we might see this start to plateau a little bit on either side, and it could really be a toss-up in that final frame. But I think the work that Bilostenniyy ends up doing in the first 2 rounds with his damage, with his defense, should be enough for him to go out there and win this fight on the scorecards. The over is a little intriguing to me because I think there's going to be a lot of lulls with Williams pinning Bilostenniyy against the cage and trying to take him down. But again, Bilostenniyy could just spin his way into a big shot to hurt Williams and put him away that way. So I thought I'd have more confidence going into this matchup on the Bilostenniyy side, but after running the tape, I'm a little bit more skeptical about it. I'm still picking him to win, and I'm going to take him to win this fight on the scorecards. Our next one up is Rasul Magomedov coming in at -2,000, going up against Guilherme Viana, who comes in at +1,000. I'm going to gloss over this one. Obviously, Magomedov, in my written breakdown, I put insert generic Dagestani fighter description here, and it's obvious. This guy loves to wrestle, loves to grapple, loves to smash his opponents from that top position, and he's going up against a 39-year-old who took 8 years away from competition between 2016 and 2024, and he's on a 2-fight winning streak since he's returned, but against very low-level competition. He's a BJJ black belt, but I just don't think he's at his physical prime to try to contest with what Magomedov is going to be doing here. So I considered the under 1.5 at -150, but Vienna's BJJ black belt might be able to save him long enough to get over that mark, but I don't want to bet the over either. So I'm going to go Magomedov. I think he eventually wears down Viana and gets him out of there late, but we don't play -2,000. It's just nonsensical to do that in mixed martial arts. Our next up, we got Impa Kasanganay coming in at -600, going up against Andrew Sanchez, who comes in at +425. Now, Kasanganay is looking to bounce back from a 2-fight losing streak, with both of those losses coming in fights where he got knocked out. The first of which against Dovlet Yagshimerdov, and then last time around against Fabian Edwards. It seems like his durability is starting to take a little bit of a hit, and it seems like he's slowing down a little bit too, which doesn't really help his defenses. If you guys even remember from last year when he went up against Jakub Neto, he nearly got finished multiple times in that first round, but managed to come back in the second round as Neto started to slow down, and he was able to win that fight back. But Kasanganay normally relies on a disciplined striking approach, utilizing his combinations, footwork, and movement to really touch opponents up from distance. But guys are seeing if they can crash the pocket with enough power, they might be able to get Kasanganay out of there. Luckily for Kasanganay, he doesn't have to worry too much about that power coming back to him against Andrew Sanchez here, who's slowed down a ton himself, has a ton of cardio issues, but is normally a guy that looks to implement a wrestling approach, smothering opponents on the ground and doing his best work from that top position. But his last 3 losses have all come in the third round, which goes to show that his gas tank is just not all that good. I lean Kasanganay here. I think we'll see him fend off the takedowns. I think we'll see him pick Sanchez apart from distance. I like the over 1.5 at -155 because I expect this fight to go to the scorecards as long as Kasanganay doesn't get chin checked and finished early. But I think Kasanganay outstrikes Sanchez, shuts down the grappling, and wins this fight on the scorecards. Just tough to pay -600 after seeing how he's been knocked out in recent fights. All right, probably the fight that I'm looking forward to most here because it is probably the most evenly matched fight. We got Bryce Meredith coming in at -110, and we got the same on the flip side here for undefeated prospect Lazaro Dayron, who comes in at -110 as well. We got to pick him fight here. Now, Meredith, 7-0, fought all of his matchups under the LFA and PFL banners. A collegiate wrestling prospect, very high level there. Does a great job in terms of getting his opponents to the ground and either smothering them and going 15 minutes, showing that he can have that gas tank to do it, or finding those finishing positions and try to get opponents out of there that way. He looked good against a dangerous BJJ black belt a few fights ago, out scrambling and outpointing them with that pressure and that top damage. Trains out of the MMA lab, very high level gym. They're obviously grooming this guy to become a high level fighter, which is what he's absolutely capable of. But now he's starting to, this is where the rubber starts to meet the road, where he starts to fight guys that are going to give him legitimate issues and will give him legitimate resistance, and we'll see if he's going to be able to bounce back from those spots. But normally he can rely on his wrestling to get into safe positions. His striking is still coming along. A lot of it is just kicks and just trying to close that distance to get those takedowns. But he's going to get his striking tested here against Lazaro Dayron, who's looking to come back after going to a draw against Danny Sabatello in his last matchup. Now, just a quick note, Dayron was actually supposed to fight in June against Matthias Matos. I believe Matos was forced to pull out of that matchup, and now he's fighting Bryce Meredith this weekend. Dayron, very solid strength of schedule, but I was very impressed from his performance against Danny Sabatello. He won that first round, nearly finishing Sabatello on numerous occasions there. The second round, I thought Sabatello got it back with some of his grappling, but we saw consistent pushback from Dayron to not give up bad positions for long periods of time, constantly working back to his feet, but he just struggled to kind of get Sabatello off of him in that second round. And then that third round, Dayron did a good job in terms of stopping most of the grappling from Sabatello and out-damaged him on the feet, but unfortunately he grabbed the fence in a crucial position, and Dayron was docked a point for that. The fight ended up going to the scorecards, and 2 judges actually scored the first and third rounds in favor of Dayron, but obviously with that point deduction in the third round, it made it a majority draw. Like I said, I was impressed with his defensive grappling, especially against a guy that smothers and chain wrestles as well as Danny Sabatello does. I just wish we saw a little bit better fight IQ from Dayron, because there were some certain sequences where he was engaging in the grappling and allowed the scrambling of Sabatello to get the better of him there. But again, Dayron was able to get out of some of those bad spots, get to his striking advantage, and start out damaging Sabatello. Now, in this matchup, similar to Dayron's last fight, but I think that Meredith is not as good of a smotherer or chain wrestler as Danny Sabatello. And what I mean by that is, like, Meredith will be able to land a few takedowns. He might be able to scramble in some spots. But as Dayron starts working back to his feet, that's where we're going to start to tell whether Meredith has what it takes to battle through that adversity and battle through that resistance. He's never faced anybody like this. He's never faced somebody that's going to cause him this much resistance in the grappling realm. And then from there, I think Dayron will have the striking advantage. And like I've been kind of pointing to throughout this week or on this podcast, judges are scoring damage more. And I think we'll see Dayron land the more damaging shots in the striking realm, even when he's defending on some of these takedown attempts as well. And I'm starting to like Dayron quite a bit in this fight. I think he'll do a good enough job in terms of stifling the most of the grappling for Meredith. I hope he doesn't choose to wrestle with Meredith because Meredith will probably out-scramble him. But as long as he keeps working back to his feet, stopping some of the takedowns coming his way, and landing some of his own significant strikes, he should get the better of Meredith in this spot. So I'm going to go Dayron. I'm going to go Dayron by decision. The over 2.5 at -180 is intriguing as well because I'd be surprised if either guy gets a finish here. Dayron, although the better striker, doesn't really pack a whole lot of power. So unless he times a perfect knee during a Meredith takedown or something, I think this ends up going the full 15 minutes. So I'm going to go Dayron by decision, and it seems like money is slowly starting to come in on him. When I researched this earlier today, he was at about +110. Now with this at evens, makes me believe that people are starting to believe on the Cuban side of things, and I have to agree with them. So give me Dayron and Dayron by decision. All right, next up, the final prelim matchup here goes down between Alexei Pergande, who comes in at -900, and Ethan Goss, who comes in at +600. Now, Pergande added to his undefeated record last time around as he earned his 6th victory after battering Mike Bardsley, a 5-1 prospect, over the course of 15 minutes. Now, that fight had this weird scenario where Pergande landed a big shot in that first round that clearly wobbled and hurt Bardsley and probably would have led to a finish. But at the same time, Pergande had got kicked in the schnuts and, out of frustration, kind of looked away and threw up his hands in protest and didn't realize that Bardsley was hurt as bad as he was. Pergande eventually got back on the gas there, started landing some big shots, bloodied up Bardsley over the next 2 rounds, but did not end up getting the finish, and he ends up winning that fight on the scorecards. Normally, he goes out there and looks to out-grapple his opponents and smash them from that top position. He does a good job in terms of smothering them there as well, but in recent fights, he's been leaning on his striking, which is great. It's good to get that live action experience, especially in a realm where he may not feel as confident as he does in the grappling realm. So his striking looks great, throws in good combinations, utilizes his distance well, picks at his opponents with his jab. I'm very excited with what this guy can turn into, especially coming out of Killcliff FC, which we know has a ton of great prospects as well. He's going up against Ethan Goss, who started his career 5-6, but really started to find his groove with the 24/7 FC promotion up there in Pittsburgh, where he went on a 7-fight winning streak, which included winning the featherweight title, winning the lightweight title, and defending those numerous times before he ended up losing by submission last time around. I believe that was back in February, where he got submitted by his opponent by heel hook, which was obviously not a good look, being 18 fights into your career and still getting heel hooked. And also being known as a guy that goes out there and often utilizes a grappling approach and tries to submit his opponents. He seems like a regional journeyman, faced, mediocre competition on the regional scene. Even that 7-fight winning streak came against guys with a combined record of 46-37. Just, the mediocre side of the regional scene, he was pretty much running shit there. But when he faced somebody that could provide legitimate resistance, that's where he started to come up short. And let's be honest, we know why he's being brought into this position here in the PFL. Coming off of a loss and then getting signed to a major promotion usually is not a good thing. And I think that we're going to see Pergande showcase that here. I want to take a shot on the under 2.5 at -135 because I think Pergande is just that much better than Goss. But there are times where Pergande just shows a lack of urgency and is just comfortable picking away at his opponents or just smothering them. And I think that's going to come back to haunt me if I end up taking a shot on the under here. So, I don't know. Once I drop my final plays and predictions post on the Patreon page, then I'll make my ultimate decision. But I think Pergande ends up getting the finish here. I think the under 2.5 ends up coming through. I just got to think on it a little bit more. But I'm going to go Pergande and Pergande by domination. All right. The first of 3 PFL world title or world tournament title fights Again, I don't know how to fucking word these things with PFL and their championship bouts, but this one goes down in the light heavyweight division as we have Sullivan Cauley coming in at -150, going up against former PFL champion Antonio Carlos Jr., who comes in at +130. Now, I want to give Cauley his flowers for being able to go out there and get a victory over former Bellator champion Phil Davis. There was a huge experience advantage in favor of Phil Davis, but Cauley landed some big shots in opportune moments and was able to squeak out that decision, even if Phil Davis looked in control for the majority of that matchup. Cauley was a guy going into that fight that had finished all of his fights in the first round. Even the fight that he'd lost to Luke Traynor finished in the first round. So there was a lot of question marks. Should that fight leak into the second round, how his gas tank would have looked? It didn't look bad, but there were moments where he was stuck against the cage and couldn't really do much until he finally got back out into space and landed those big shots to hurt Phil Davis. Had he not hurt Davis, he probably would have ended up losing that fight, but credit to him for finding the power and the opportunities to land those big shots. I believe he comes from a wrestling background. He's one of the main training partners of Ryan Bader. He loves to take opponents to the ground as soon as he can and then just dominate them from that top position. But I think he's starting to see in recent fights that it's going to get harder to do that as he faces high levels of competition. And obviously, depending on the stylistic matchup he's going up against. He's explosive, he's fast, he's powerful. And he's slowly gaining resistance here or experience and continue to sharpen his skill set. I was going up against former PFL champion Antonio Carlos Jr., who's now 8-1 since leaving the UFC. His lone defeat, I believe, came against Alex Polizzi, who was able to just nullify and outdamage Carlos Jr. over the course of 15 minutes. Now, we know what Shoeface is good at, right? He's all about the BJJ. He's all about finding the back of his opponents and sinking in chokes or just grinding out these positions and just asserting his dominance. His striking is a little bit underrated. He throws with a lot of power. He has some decent head kicks. He throws a lot in his shots so that he can either land that big shot to drop his opponents or utilize that to hide a takedown attempt or a clinch opportunity behind it so that he can slowly work to his opponent's back and eventually get to his BJJ game. Getting up there in age a little bit, his run through this season or this tournament so far started off kind of grimy against Carl Moore, where he won a split decision back in May. And then in June, I believe it was... I believe it was June where he went up against Simeon Powell. It seemed like Powell was just way too gun-shy and just allowed Carlos Jr. to dictate the pace of that fight. And Carlos Jr. got all the positions that he needed. He got the takedowns when he wanted. He controlled the striking range. Very surprising, as I thought Powell would be the better striker and would be able to show off enough of his takedown defense to get the better of Carlos Jr. on the feet, but that just did not end up being the case. Carlos Jr. In this matchup is going to have to... Again, Cauley is probably the better technical wrestler, but there are moments where Antonio Carlos Jr. could initiate the clinch, and we've seen Cauley give up his back a lot, especially to Phil Davis, but Phil Davis obviously not as good as BJJ specialist as Carlos Jr. So I know once Carlos Jr. gets a little bit of that back of Cauley, he's going to try to jump and get the hooks in and try to get Cauley out that way. I think Carlos has the chances to get the submission victory within the first 2 rounds here, but if he can't, I think we've seen enough good things from Cauley in the striking realm that he might be able to land big shots to demoralize and wear down Carlos Jr., which should eventually lead to Cauley getting his own knockout victory as well. I believe the total is set at 2.5. I feel like this is a fight that has the ability to squeak over that 2.5 round mark. A lot of it having to do with Carlos Jr. trying to gauge in the grappling realm and maybe not being successful with it. So I don't have a strong opinion on the total. I think it's going to end up being Cauley that just does enough to survive the BJJ threat of Carlos Jr. and then eventually lands those big shots and breaks Carlos Jr. down and finds that knockout victory. But at -150, I don't really have too much intrigue to go out there to the betting window and take Cauley at chalk here, as he's still rounding out his resume in terms of fighting guys with the experience level of Carlos Jr. He did against Phil Davis last time around, but we saw if he's not able to land those big shots, he may have lost that fight. So if he can't do it here against Carlos Jr., maybe he gets grinded out as well. So very weird, sketchy fight all around here in the light heavyweight division. For prediction's sake, I will go Cauley by knockout, but very, very low confidence. All right, that brings us to the co-main event, which is for the heavyweight PFL world tournament title, where we got Alexander Romanov coming in at plus 170 and Oleg Popov coming in at minus 200. Now, Romanov had a pretty easy first round against Tim Johnson where he was able to submit him. I believe it was a standing guillotine that he got him with there. But then it was a very tough second fight against Valentin Moldavsky. Not so much that he did have some success early in that fight. Landed a few takedowns, had some good top control, had some decent cage control. But then there was a very nasty knee that Moldavsky landed to the schnuts of Romanov, and Romanov crumpled in pain immediately. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I think he was stretchered out as well. So it was a very bad look. But the PFL was forced to pick a winner, although that the official result of that fight was a no contest. They had to pick a winner to go on to the finals. And luckily for Romanov and the work that he did through the first 3.5 to 4 minutes of that fight was enough for the judges to award him the right to go to the finals and fight for the PFL world title. We know what Romanov is good off, right? Takedowns, top pressure. When he can't get that early grappling to work, then he starts relying on a tepid-based striking approach with the threat of the wrestling normally muzzling his opponents and forcing them to strike with him, but allowing Romanov to kind of dictate the pace there. We know he has a sketchy gas tank. We know if fights start to leak in the second and third rounds, he's going to struggle against guys that he can't dictate the pace against. And I think that's the trouble he's going to run in here against Popov. Now, Popov, very unfortunate. He had a 9-year unbeaten streak going into last year's finals, and then he ended up getting triangle choked by Denis Goltsov, which is a very weird circumstance. He got Goltsov down, but then just put himself into a triangle and got put out cleanly there. So I think he thought he wasn't in much trouble, but then his lights got put out, and obviously he lost. But he's managed to bounce back in 2025 with victories over Rodrigo Nascimento. I believe the first one was actually over Carl Williams. Close fight there. New scoring probably would have given that fight to Carl Williams, but Popov ends up getting the split there. And then his last one against Rodrigo Nascimento, which was a lot easier. It was easier to get takedowns, it was easier to get the clinch position, and it was easier to wear Nascimento down to win that fight. Popov, mediocre striker, but he does his best work when he can get that clinch position, where he pins opponents up against the cage, drives his forward into their chin and upper chest area to pin them there, and then from there he just gets off on dirty boxing, some knees, some elbows, mixes in some takedowns when he sees the opportunities for it, but he has a great gas tank to do it against guys, even guys that are much bigger than him as well. 9 of his 21 victories have come by decision, showing that he can go 15 minutes without much issue. Obviously, he'll probably have to go 25 here if he can't get Romanov out of there early. But I think with him being the favorite, I think he's the side. Romanov could have some early success here, but I believe in Popov's ability to stay away from too much danger. I don't expect him to fall into a triangle choke against Romanov. Obviously, there's going to be some submission threat from Romanov early, but if Popov can continue to fight that off and then get to his game, and even if he's not able to land takedowns, through the first 2 or 3 rounds, just that clinch work, that constant pressure is going to clearly wear Romanov down, and I think that will eventually lead to Popov getting a finish probably in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. His durability is normally on point, his cardio is on point, and again, Romanov is only dangerous for about a round and a half, and even if Romanov fails to get off on his wrestling success early and tries to lean on that tepid pace striking approach, that's not going to work here. Popov will push him, he will pressure him, he will counter him, and then engage in the clinch and wear Romanov down there. So I think we'll see Popov, like I said, around 3, 4, 5 props are what I'm going to be looking at here. I don't mind him at that minus 200 range either. I think he wears Romanov down and finishes him in championship rounds. So give me Popov and Popov by TKO. All right. Main event now for the middleweight PFL World Tournament title, where we got Fabian Edwards coming in at minus 170 going up against Dalton Rosta, who comes in at plus 145. Now, for Edwards, he's held a 6-2 record since 2022, with his only 2 losses coming against former champion Johnny Eblen. Those are fights where he really couldn't deal with the overall game of Eblen, some of the takedowns, some of the control. I believe the second fight was slightly closer than the first, but still he showed some issues there. But he is showcasing that his takedown defense is highly improved. Obviously was able to get that nasty knockout victory over Kasanganay in his first fight with the the PFL, or at least for this world tournament. And then last time around, shut down the grappling of Josh Silveira early and then out-grappled him and outworked him for the second and third rounds to win that fight. He's a great striker, has underrated grappling of his own. I'm still surprised he has that win over Gegard Mousasi. Big win for him there. And I think he's been relatively underrated throughout his career. This will be his opportunity to kind of stamp himself and showcase that, hey, I'm still one of the best middleweights on the PFL tour, or PFL, I guess Bellator is folded now, but the PFL roster. And I think this is a good matchup for him to do it against. He's going up against Dalton Rosta, who had a very tightly contested matchup against Aaron Jeffrey back in June. Very close fight. I thought once I hit the scorecards, I thought Jeffrey was going to get his hand raised, but Rosta had done enough work with his hands to get two judges to actually score that fight in his favor. Rosta is normally a guy that likes to utilize wrestling and top control to grind his fights out. He's improving his striking game, throwing with a little bit more power and combinations, but he does start to slow down later on in fights, and that's where most opponents have been able to get the opponents that have gotten the better of him, namely only Aaron Jeffrey, are able to start pulling away later on in those matchups. Here against Fabian Edwards, I don't know if he has what it takes to go into championship rounds and still have that type of grappling success. I think we'll see Fabian Edwards shut most of that down. This will likely be competitive for about a round and a half, especially with the power and the strength of Rosta. But as Edwards starts to wear him down, maybe starts getting the clinch position, maybe landing a few takedowns of his own. But I think the best work for Edwards will be done in the striking realm as he touches up Rosta, as Rosta starts whiffing at air. Again, he's still improving his striking game. He's throwing with so much heat and so much power, which doesn't really help in a 25-minute fight. And as long as he doesn't knock out Edwards, which I'd be very surprised about, I think Edwards controls this fight, especially in the latter half, probably rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 3, 4, 5. Edwards wins. I think he outdamages Rosta, shuts down the grappling, gets some of his grappling going as well, and I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards, and I think minus 170 is a pretty damn good line as well. There you guys go. PFL broken down for you guys, all 10 fights. Hopefully it becomes fruitful information for you guys to add some cash to your pocket. Again, I have my official plays and predictions on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. I'll be finalizing that card on Thursday afternoon. I'll post it in the comment section below as well. So if you guys want to check it out, you can check it there, or just check the description and check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Otherwise, I'm going to get to work on the LFA and Road to UFC cards so I can drop the LFA breakdown for you guys tomorrow on the YouTube page. All right. Good luck on all your action this week, folks. I'll see you guys again actually later today for the quick picks version of the UFC Shanghai breakdown. See you guys then.
Last thing.